The smoke was the first thing she noticed. It crept into her lungs like a living thing, thin and acrid at first, then thick and choking. Elara gasped, her eyes flying open to a world of orange and red. Flames licked at the walls of her chamber, consuming the tapestries that had once depicted her wedding day. The faces of the embroidered figures twisted in the heat, their joyous expressions developing into grotesque masks of mockery. The fire was beautiful in its destruction, a hungry beast that devoured everything in its path, and she was its prey. Her wrists burned. She looked down to see the raw, bloody rocks where the iron manacles had bitten into her flesh. She had been chained to the bedpost, the heavy oak frame now a blazing pyre around her. Her wedding gown, the white silk that had been so carefully stitched with pearls and silver thread, was blackened and smoking. The jewels Rosalind had given her as a wedding gift hung heavy around her neck, their cold stones now searing hot against her skin. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, a ragged sound that turned into a cough. They had not even given her the dignity of a quick death. Through the roaring flames, she could hear their voices, distant, distorted but unmistakable. She's still alive, her husband's voice. Prince d'Ariane. He did not sound concerned. He sounded annoyed. It was an inconvenience. That was all she was to him. A loose end that was taking too long to burn. A few moments more, Your Highness, a servant replied. The flames are spreading quickly. She will be gone soon. Elara's here tea, battered and broken, surged with a desperate, primal will to live. She tried to pull herself free, but the chains were bolted to the floor. The iron was scorching hot, and with every movement, her skin red and blistered. She screamed. A raw, animalistic cry that was swallowed by the crackling inferno. Let me out, please, someone help me. Her voice was really a whisper. The smoke was too thick, the heat was unbearable. She could feel her skin blistering, her hair singeing. She was being roasted alive like a bird on a spit. And they were waiting for her to stop screaming, so they could count her as dead. My lady. A familiar voice, small and trembling. It was Anya, her handmaiden. The girl was on the other side of the door, pounding on the wood. Please, someone help, the princess is in there. Stand aside, a gruff voice commanded. It was Sir Aldrich, one of d'Ariane's knights. The fire is too great. There is nothing we can do. No. Please, the door is not locked. It's not even barred. If you would just. Anya's plea was cut off by a sickening thud, the sound of steel meeting flesh, a soft, gurgling cry, and then silence. Elara's tears evaporated before they could fall. She stood at the door, the wood arping and blackening in the heat. Anya, the only person who had ever truly cared for her. The girl had tried to save her, and d'Ariane's men had struck her down like a stray dog. A cold, hollow emptiness filled Elara's chest. They had taken everything, her father, her sister, her husband, and now, the only loyal soul she had ever known. She closed her eyes, trying to escape the horror, but the flames were inside her head now. The memory of the past 3 years played on an endless, full, calculated ways they had dismantled her. She remembered the day of her wedding, how happy she had been, so naive, so desperately in love. D'Ariane had looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. He had whispered promises of a life filled with happiness, of children and a future together. She had believed him. She had given him everything, her fortune, her inheritance, her body, her soul. She remembered the first time she had seen Rosalind in his arms. It was a year after their wedding. She had walked into his private study, unannounced, carrying a tray of tea she had made herself. She had wanted to surprise him, to show him what a good wife she was. Instead, she had found him embracing her sister, his lips on Rosalind's neck, whispering the same sweet, honeyed lies he had once whispered to her. Rosalind had seen her first, a flicker of triumph in her honey-colored eyes. Raw, she had said, her voice dripping with false surprise. I was just comforting the prince. He is so worried about the political situation. Men carry such heavy burdens, do they not? d'Ariane had turned, a look of irritation flashing across his face before he smoothed it into a mask of concern. My love, you should not trouble yourself. This is nothing, a moment of weakness. She had been too stunned to speak, too broken to scream. She had stood there, the tray of tea trembling in her hands. And she had done the only thing she knew how to do. She had retreated, she had apologized. She had told herself it was a mistake, that she was being paranoid, that her husband and her sister would never betray her like that. She had been a fool. The betrayals had continued, piling on top of each other like bricks in a wall that was slowly closing her in. Her father, the Duke of Ashworth, had begun to grow cold with her. He praised Rosalind's beauty, her grace, her intelligence. He read them openly, at every family gathering. Why can you not be more like your sister? Elara. She is such a credit to this family. He had said it with a sigh, as if she were a failed project, an investment that had not yielded the expected return. She remembered the night she had confronted him, desperate and broken, begging him to intervene, to stop the whispers about Rian and Rosalind. Her father had looked at her with cold. "Do not be a fool," he had said. "If the prince has found comfort in your sister's arms, then it is a comfort that benefits our house. You would do well to be gracious about it. A woman's duty is to her family, not to her own selfish desires." Her own father had sold her out. He had used her to secure a royal alliance, and now that the alliance was made, he was happy to replace her with a more pliable, more profitable daughter. Rosalind was everything he had ever wanted, beautiful, obedient, and utterly ruthless. She played the role of the sweet, innocent sister perfectly, all the while poisoning Elara's life with 1,000 tiny cuts. She remembered the night she had discovered she was pregnant. It was a miracle, a gift from the gods. She had rushed to find Rian, her heart overflowing with joy. She had found him in the gardens with Rosalind. She had heard his voice loud and angry. "A child. Are you certain?" He had sounded panicked, not joyful. "It will ruin everything. We cannot have a child, not now, not with her." Rosalind's voice had been soft, soothing. "It will be a problem, your highness. We cannot afford a complication. She is already a burden to you, a pale, pathetic creature who brings nothing but shame to your name. A child would simply slow you down." Elara had stumbled back, her hand flying to her stomach. They were discussing her baby, as if it were a tumor to be removed. That night, Rosalind had come to her room with a cup of tea, a sweet smile on her face. "You look tired, sis," she had said. "I had the kitchen prep a special tonic. It will help you sleep." Elara had drunk it. She had trusted her sister. She had woken hours later in a pool of blood, the life inside her gone. "An unfortunate miscarriage," the physician had said. "These things happen. It was not a strong child." Rian had been there holding her hand, his face a mask of false grief. "We will try again, my love," he had whispered. "We will have many children. Do not despair." But his eyes had been hollow. There was no sadness in them, only relief. Now, as the flames licked at her feet, she understood it all. The miscarriage had not been an accident. Rosalind's tea had been laced with poison. They had killed her child. They had killed the only innocent thing she had ever created. And they had done it with a smile. They had made her believe she was to blame, that her body was weak and flawed. They had stripped her of her identity, her purpose, her will to fight. They had isolated her, starved her of love and affection, and when she was nothing but a hollow shell, they had decided to get rid of her. She had heard them planning it. 2 nights ago, she had been pretending to sleep, and Rian and Rosalind had been in the next room. She had heard Rosalind's voice. "We cannot wait any longer. The king is dying. He will name his successor soon. Rian cannot afford to be tied to a woman who brings him no advantage. You need to be free." "Free to Meme," Rian had said, his voice full of adoration. "Yes, I know. But how do we rid ourselves of her without scandal?" "The fire," Rosalind had said. "A tragic accident. She was always so clumsy. It will be a simple matter. The old wing of the castle is practically abandoned. We will have her moved there, and then, accidents happen. Her murder was just an accident to them. She was a piece on a chessboard that had outlived her usefulness. And they were ready to sweep her away." The fire had been set that night. The old wing of Castle Veritas was dry and tinder-filled. It burned like a torch. Rian had come to her room himself, his face hard and unforgiving. He had told her he was moving her to the old tower, to protect her from the danger of the celebration in the main hall. She had been too weak to resist, too exhausted to see. She had let him lead her, let him chain her to the bed, and only when he was gone had the scream rotted. Now, she was paying the price for her blindness, her trust, her love. It had all been a lie. Everything they had ever told her had been a carefully constructed trap, designed to destroy her. Her father had thrown her to the wolves. Rosalind had stolen her husband and murdered her child. Rian had seduced her, used her, and was now burning her alive so he could marry her sister. A perfect clean sweep. The Ashworth family would be united with the crown in a way that would make them untouchable. And she would be nothing but a pile of ash. A cautionary tale whispered by the servants about the foolish, knave princess who could not keep her husband's love. The flames reached her gown, the silk melted against her skin, the agony so intense that she could not even scream. Her throat was raw, her lungs were filled with smoke. She was dying, she could feel herself fading, the edges of her vision darkening. "Please," she whispered to no one. "Please, someone, anyone, I do not want to die. Not like this, not alone." She thought of the world they would create without her, the celebrations, the wedding, the children Rosalind would be the dynasty they would build on the foundation of her ashes. The injustice of it was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, more suffocating than the smoke. She thought of Dorian's hands, so gentle when he had courted her, now a murderer's hands. She thought of Rosalind's smile, once a source of comfort, now the leer of a demon. She thought of her father's stern face, a face that had not shed a single tear for her dead mother, and would not shade one for her. Tears streamed down her cheeks, evaporating instantly in the heat. They were not tears of sadness, they were tears of rage, a pure blinding, all-consuming fury. She did not want to die, she wanted to fight, she wanted to live, she wanted to make them pay for every tear she had cried, every ounce of blood she had shed, every moment of torment they had put her through. She wanted to see the look on their faces, when everything they had built turned to ash in their hands. But it was too late, the fire was too strong. She was too weak. She closed her eyes, the world grew distant, the roar of the flames faded to a dull hum, and then, there was nothing, just darkness, just silence, just the cold, empty void of death. She felt herself floating, a disembodied soul adrift in an endless black sea. She was dead, she was gone, the world had moved on, and she had become a memory, a painful, inconvenient memory that would soon be forgotten. But then, the darkness was broken by a pinprick of light. It grew, a tiny star that swelled into a blinding sun. She felt a jolt, a violent, wrenching sensation, as if she were being pulled back into her body. She gasped, air flooded her lungs, clean and cold and impossibly sweet. She was no longer choking, she was no longer burning. She opened her eyes. She was staring at a familiar canopy, embroidered silk, a pattern of roses and thorns, her wedding canopy, but it was not blackened, it was not burned, it was new, pristine. The morning sun was streaming through the windows, casting a soft, golden glow across the room. The scent of lavender hung in the air, mixed with the crisp smell of autumn. The fire was gone, the smoke was gone, the pain was gone. She was lying in her bed, in her chambers at Castle Ashworth, the castle she had grown up in, the place she had left 3 years ago, a naive bride full of hope. Her hand flew to her wrist, expecting the raw, bloody marks of the manacles. There was nothing, her skin was smooth and unblemished. She looked down at herself. She was wearing a simple linen nightgown, the white fabric unmarred by soot or flame. Her hair, which had been burned away, was now long and silken, cascading over the pillows. She touched her face, half expecting to feel red skin. It was so soft, young. A mirror sat on her vanity across the room. She threw back the covers, her legs trembling, and stumbled toward it. She looked into the glass, and she gasped. It was her face, but it was not her face. It was the face of a girl of 18. The soft, youthful features she had not seen in years, the unlined skin, the bright eyes, the face of Elara Ashworth on the morning of her wedding day. The face of a woman who had not yet been betrayed, who had not yet lost her child, who had not yet been broken. She was not dead, she was not in the afterlife, she was alive, she was back, she was here. On the day everything had begun, the door to her chamber creaked open. A maid entered, a girl with a sweet, round face and kind eyes. Anya, young and whole and breathing. "My lady, you reawake," Anya said, her voice bright with affection. "I was just coming to check on you. Your father will be waiting for you in the great hall. The prince has arrived. He wants to see you before the ceremony. He is so eager, my lady. I think he is quite in love with you." Love, the word was a knife in Elara's heart. She stared at Anya, this ghost of her past, and she felt a sob building in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She could not afford tears, not now, not ever again. Elara said, her voice soft but firm. She needed a moment, she needed to think. She needed to understand what was happening. Anya looked startled, but she nodded. "Of course, my lady, I will fetch your gown, the white silk with the pérols. It is the one you wanted." When the door clicked shut, Elara sank to her knees on the cold stone floor. She pressed her hands to her face, her whole body trembling. It was real. She could feel the cold stone beneath her. She could hear the birds singing outside. She could smell the lavender. She was in her old body, in her old life. On the day she was about to make the biggest mistake of her existence, she had been given a second chance. A gift from the gods, or the devil, or whoever had pulled her back from the void. She did not know why she had been red. She did not know how. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not make the same mistakes again. She rose to her feet, her reflection staring back at her. The girl in the mirror looked red, fragile, uncertain. But the woman looking out from her eyes was anything but. That woman was forged in fire. That woman had seen death. That woman had been betrayed by everyone she loved, and she had burned for their sins. And that woman was not about to let them win. Downstairs, waiting to smile at her, to lie to her, to steer the long, slow process of destroying her, Rosalind was probably with him, already plotting. Her father was in the great hall, ready to sell her to the highest bidder. The same cast of actors, the same stage, the same script. But Elara was no longer the naive actress who followed the script blindly. She was the writer now. And she was going to rewrite this story from the very first line. The ceremony was in a few hours. She was supposed to marry Rian, to seal the alliance between House Ashworth and the crown. But she remembered what he had done to her in her first life, the other women, the contempt, the murder of her child, the fire. She would not let him claim her again. She would not let him shackle her to a life of misery and pain. She would not let Rosalind steal everything she had. She would not let her father discard her like a broken toy. A cold hard smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a predator. She looked at her reflection, and for the first time in years, she saw strength. Allah, she whispered to the girl in the mirror, welcome home. The words tasted like ash and victory. She turned away from the mirror, her mind racing with possibilities. She had to act fast. The ceremony was in a matter of hours, but she had time. She had just enough time to throw a wrench into their perfect plans. She did not know exactly what she was going to do yet, but she knew one thing. She was going to survive, she was going to fight, and she was going to make them all pay. She was going to be the one they could never forget, not because of her beauty or her grace, or her sweetness, but because she was the ghost they had tried to burn. And she had come back from the dead to haunt them. Anya, searing a magnificent white gown. I have your dress, my lady, she said. Be you ready? Elara turned to her, her expression softening. She owed this girl a life, she owed her everything, but she could not show her hand, not yet. I am ready, Elara said, her voice smooth as silk. She stepped toward the dress, her heart pounding with a fierce exhilaration. I am more ready than I have ever been. The white silk gown felt like a shroud against Elara's skin as Anya laced it into place. Each tug of the ribbons sent a small jolt through her. A reminder of the first time she had worn this dress. She had been trembling then, too, but from a different kind of fear, the fear of the unknown, the fear of disappointing her father, the fear that Rian might not truly love her. Now she knew the truth, and the trembling was pure. Crystalline rage really contained beneath her serene smile. You look beautiful, my lady, Anya said, stepping back to admire her work. The prince will be speechless. Elara met her own eyes in the mirror. The girl's stay-ring back was a portrait of innocence. Pierres nestled in her honey-colored hair, a blush on her cheek, ice-white and luminous. She was the picture of a blushing bride, and she hated it, but she needed this mask. She needed to be the knave, trusting Elara they all expected. At least for a little while longer. Thank you, Anya, she said, her voice soft. Would you do something for me? Go to the kitchens and bring me a cup of chamomile tea. My nerves are afraid, and I need a moment to compose myself before I see the prince. I want to be calm for him. Anya nodded eagerly, happy to be of use. Of course. I will be right back. The door closed behind the girl, and Elara's serene expression vanished. She crossed the room in 3 quick strides and pulled open the drawer of her vanity. Inside lay a small leather-bound journal. Its page. She had rotted it on the eve of her wedding in her first life, intending to record her happiness. She had never written a single word. It had been a gift from Rosalind, and Elara had been too choked with emotion to use it. Now, she saw it for what it was, a taunt. A reminder that her sister had already claimed the role of confidante, the keeper of Elara's secrets. She picked up a quill, dipped it in ink, and wrote a single line on the first page. They will not win. It was not a journal entry, it was a vow. She tucked the journal into the folds of her gown, just as a soft knock sounded at the door. Her heart leapt. It was too soon for Anya to have returned. Enter, she called, her voice steady. The door swung open, and Rosalind glided into the room. She was dressed in a gown of pale rose, her copper hair arranged in elaborate curls. She looked like a painting, all soft edges and warm colors, a masterpiece of deception. Sister Rosalind Seaweed, crossing the room to take Elara's hands. Her touch was sea-old and dry, the touch of a serpent. I came to see you before the ceremony. I wanted to wish you luck. Elara forced herself to smile. The effort was monumental. Thank you, Rosalind, that is kind of you. Rosalind's honey-colored eyes swept over Elara's gown, her jewelry, her seriously arranged hair. You look adequate, she said, the word dripping with faint condescension. But I do think the pierres are a bit much. They make you look older. Perhaps you should remove them. The prince prefers a more youthful apparence. It was the same manipulation she had used before. A small, subtle attack on Elara's confidence, designed to make her doubt herself. In her first life, Elara had immediately removed the pyres, mortified that she had made a mistake. But not this time. I think the pyres are perfect, Elara said, her voice sweet as honey. They were mother's. I want to see a piece of her with me today. She met Rosalind's gaze, holding it. I would never want to dishonor her memory by setting aside her gift. Rosalind's smile flickered. It was barely perceptible, a tiny crack in the porcelain mask, but Elara saw it. She filed it away. Of course, sister, Rosalind said, recovering quickly. I meant no offense. I only want what is best for you. You nah? Elara asked, tilting her head. The question hung in the air. Light as a feather but weighted with meaning. Rosalind's eyes enrowed. What do you mean? Elara laughed. A soft, tinkling sound that she had practiced in the mirror 100 times. I am just teasing you, sister. You're always so serious. I am just nervous, that is all. It is my wedding day. I am allowed to be a little strange. Rosalind laughed too, but the sound was hollow. She was studying Elara, trying to read her, and Elara let her look, let her see the nervous bride, the trembling girl, the docile fool. It was the role she had been born to play. And she played it to perfection. Rosalind said. I will leave you to your preparations. But I wanted to tell you something before the ceremony. Something I think you should know. Elara's stomach tightened. Here it was, the first move in the game. She remembered this conversation from her first life. Rosalind had come to her with a whispered nui raning. A concern about Ryan's reputation that she had intended to sow seeds of doubt in Elara's mind. It had worked. Elara had gone to the altar trembling, unsure of her husband-to-be, and the uncertainty had made her weak and pliable. What is Elara asked, her voice dripping with feigned concern. I have heard rumors, Rosalind said, leaning in close. Her breath was arm against Elara's ear. About the prince. They say he is not faithful, that he has a wandering eye. I do not want you to be hurt, sister. I thought you should know before you commit yourself to him. In her first life, Elara had been devastated. She had wept in Rosalind's arms, asking what she should do. Rosalind had comforted her, telling her that all men were the same, that she should simply accept it and focus on her duties. She had been the one to push Elara toward the altar, her whispered reassurances masked as sisterly advice. Elara looked at Rosalind with wide, trusting eyes. Oh, Rosalind, she breathed. You are so good to worry about me. But I cannot believe such things about the prince. He is so gentle, he would never betray me. I am sure the rumors are just jealousy. People are always trying to tear down the powerful. Rosalind blinked, clearly thrown off by the response. But sister, Elara said firmly, taking Rosalind's hands in hers. And I trust you are my sister, my closest confidant. If you thought he was truly a bad man, you would tell me, would you not? You would not let me walk into a trap. The trap snapped shut around Rosalind's own feet. She could not admit that she was lying, that she knew Ryan was a serpent, without exposing her own involvement. She was stuck, her smile was brittle. Of course I would tell you. I am just looking out for you, and I love you for it, Elara said, pulling her into an embrace. She felt Rosalind stiffen, the resistance in her body, and she smiled against her sister's shoulder. Now, go, I must finish preparing. I will see you at the altar. Rosalind fled. It was the only word for it. She practically fled the room, her composure cracking as she walked out the door. Elara watched, a cold satisfaction settling in her bones. She had turned Rosalind's own weapon against her. The seed of doubt had been planted, but not in Elara's heart, in Rosalind's. The next hour passed in a blur. Elara allowed Anya to fuss over her, to adjust her veil, to pin the last of the pyres into her hair. She moved through the motions like a puppet, her mind away plotting. She had a plan, a desperate, dangerous plan, but it was the only one she had. When the doors to the great hall finally swung open, Elara stepped forward into the sea of faces. The hall was packed with nobles, their jewels glittering in the candlelight. The king sat on his throne at the far his face pale and weary. Ryan stood at the altar, resplendent in gold and white, his smile as bright as the sun. He looked like a prince from a storybook, a hero, a savior. She knew the truth. He was a monster in a hero's skin. Her father was at her side, his hand on her arm, his grip was firm. Proprietary, she was his property, and he was delivering her to the crown. You look well, Elara, he murmured, his voice low. Do not shame me today. Smile. Do not speak unless you are spoken to. You understand? Yes, father, she said, her voice a whisper. I understand perfectly. They walked down the aisle together, the eyes of the court on them. Elara kept her gaze fixed on Ryan, her smile soft and adoring. She watched him watch her, and she saw the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought she was his, a possession to be used and discarded. She reached the altar, and her father placed her hand in Diarian's. His fingers were goo, and his grip was possessive. "You look beautiful, Elara," he said, his voice full of practiced tenderness. "I have waited so long for this day." "Have you, my prince?" she asked, her voice soft. "How long, exactly?" He blinked. It was a strange question, one that did not fit the script. "A lifetime," he recovered quickly. And she let him lead her to the center of the altar. The priest began to speak, his voice droning on about duty and fidelity and the sacred bonds of marriage. "Mar." But she was not hearing the words. She was watching Diarian's face, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his eyes kept flicking toward the front row. Rosalind. Her sister was sitting there, her face a perfect mask of sisterly joy, but Elara could see the hunger in her eyes. The triumph. They thought they had pulled it off. They thought she was trapped. "I, Prince Diarian of the House of Valdoria, take thee, Elara of the House of Ashworth, to be my wedded wife." He spoke the words with conviction, his voice ringing through the hall. Elara waited until he finished. She waited until the priest looked at her, his eyes expectant. She waited until the silence stretched, uncomfortable and strange. And then she spoke. "I am sorry, your highness," she said, her voice clear as a bell, "but I cannot marry you." The hall erupted gasps, whispers, the sound of a goblet shattering on the floor. Diarian's face went white, then red. "What did you say?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "I cannot marry you," she repeated, louder this time. She turned to face the assembled nobles, her heart pounding in her chest. "I have discovered that you are not the man I thought you were. You have been unfaithful to me, I have proof." She pulled a small folded letter from her bodice. It was a forgery, of course. She had written it herself, copying Diarian's hand perfectly from the dozens of letters he had sent her during their courtship. It was a love letter addressed to another woman, a woman whose name she had chosen carefully, a woman who did not exist. Diarian snatched the letter from her hand, scanning it, his face contorted with fury. "This is a lie, I never wrote this. It is your hand." Elara said, her voice trembling with false tears. "I would recognize it anywhere. You promised me you would be faithful. You promised me your hair. And you have given it to another." She let the tears fall, great, dramatic sobs that shook her shoulders. It was a performance, and it was magnificent. The crowd was in an uproar. The nobles were whispering, pointing, their faces a mixture of shock and delight. The scandal was better than any tournament, any ball. Her father's face was a thundercloud. He stepped forward, his hand closing around her arm like a vice. "What is the meaning of this, girl? Have you lost your mind?" "I have found it, father," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "meant only for him. And I will not be sold like a cow at market. I will not marry a man who will betray me. I would rather die." Diarian was sputtering, his composure shattered. "This is a trick. Someone has put her up to this. Lady Rosalind, tell them she is unwell." Rosalind rose from her seat, her face pale. She looked like a deer caught in the crossfire. "I do not know what to say, Elara. Please, you are humiliating yourself. Come away with me. We can talk about this in private," Elara said, pulling her arm free from her father's grip. "I will not be silenced. I will not be hidden away. I will not be the victim of a lie." She turned back to Diarian, her eyes blazing with a fire that had nothing to do with TARs. "You wanted a wife, your highness. You wanted an alliance, but you do not want me. You want my inheritance, my family's name, my father's Hermes. You wanted to use me, and when you were done, you would have cast me aside. I see it now. I see all of it." It was a risky gambit, accusing him of such a thing in public, but she knew Diarian, she knew his pride. He would never admit to any of it. He would deny it, deflect it, and in doing so, he would make himself look guilty. "This is madness," Diarian declared, turning to the king. "Father, you see this. She is hysterical. The marriage must go on. It is a political necessity." The king, who had been watching the whole spectacle with a look of wry amusement, raised a hand. "The lady has made her wishes clear. Diarian, I will not force a woman to marry a man she believes has wronged her. It is bad for the kingdom and worse for the soul." The words were a death sentence for Diarian's plans. Elara could see the fury in his eyes, the barely contained rage. He had been humiliated, in front of the entire court, and there was nothing he could do about it. She had won the first battle. The wedding was off, she was free, but she was not safe. Her father was staring at her with cold, murderous eye. Rosalind looked like she was about to be sick. Diarian was already plotting his revenge. And in the shadows, a figure watched. A man with dark hair and midnight eyes. Lord Callan, the king's bastard son. He had been leaning against a pillar, unnoticed, observing everything. As Elara turned to walk away, his gaze met hers. He did not smile, he did not nod. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of acknowledgement, of respect, of something she could not name. She had made a powerful enemy today, but she had also made a powerful ally. She just did not know it yet. As she swept out of the hall, her heart pounding with a wild. She knew that this was just the beginning. The guillard was only stie, and she had just fired the first shot. The corridor outside the great hall was cold, the stone walls slick with damp. Elara walked as fast as she could without running, her white silk gown rustling against the floor like the whisper of ghosts. Her heart was a wild drum in her chest, pounding out a rhythm of terror and triumph. She had done it, she had stopped the wedding, she had humiliated D. Rian in front of the entire court. She had planted the seed of doubt about his character. A seed that would grow into a weed that would choke his ambitions. But the cost was already looming behind her. Elara. Her father's voice cracked like a whip through the empty corridor. She heard his heavy footsteps, the angry clatter of his boots on the stone. Stop this instant. She stopped. She had no choice. She turned to face him, her chin lifted, her expression seriously blank. The Duke of Ashworth was a terrifying figure when he was angry. His face was flushed, his eyes bulging with really contained fury. He looked like a man on the verge of apoplexy. Have you lost your mind? He demanded, grabbing her arm and shaking her. Do you have any idea what you have done? You have insulted the crown. You have made a mockery of our family. The prince will never forgive this. The king will never forgive this. You have ruined everything. Everything? Elara asked, her voice soft and steady. Or just your plans? His hand connected with her cheek before she could flinch. The slap was sharp and stinging. Snapping her head to the side, she tasted blood on her lip. It was warm and metallic, and it grounded her. This was the father she had always known. The man who used his fists when words failed him. She had forgotten how much it hurt. But she had not forgotten the hatred that followed. You ungrateful little wretch, he hissed, his face inches from hers. I have given you everything. I have raised you, clothed you, fed you. I have secured you a match that would make any woman in the kingdom weep with joy. And this is how you repay me. By making a fool of me in front of the entire court. You raised me. Elara laughed, a cold hollow sound. You sold me, father. You sold me to the highest bidder. You did not see if he was faithful. You did not see if he was kind. You only read about the alliance, about the power, about the gold. His eyes widened. He had never heard her speak like this. The meek, obedient daughter who always lowered her gaze and whispered her apologies was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked him in the eye and spoke the truth, and it unnerved him. You are hysterical, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I will have the physician give you something to calm your nerves, and then we will discuss your future. I will find you another match, a lesser house perhaps, one that will not be so practical. Elara said, pulling her arm free from his grip. You will not. I am done being your pawn. I am done being sold to the highest bidder. I will choose my own husband. I will choose my own future. And you will not stop me. The Duke stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. He was not used to defiance. He did not know how to respond to it. For a long moment, he simply stood there, his face a mask of confusion and rage. You will regret this, he finally said, his voice low and venomous. You will come crawling back to me, begging for my forgiveness, and when you do, I will not be so generous. He turned and strode away, his cape billowing behind him. Ra watched him go, her heart hammering in her chest. She had won this battle, but the guillard was far from over. Her father was not a man who forgot an insult. He would be watching her, waiting for her to stumble, and when she did, he would be there to crush her. She pressed a hand to her stinging cheek, wincing at the tenderness. The memory of his hand would be visible for days, a reminder of the kind of man he was. A reminder of why she could never trust him again. She walked on, her steps slower now, the adrenaline fading from her blood. She needed to think, she needed a plan. She had stopped the wedding, but she had not escaped the trap. She was still in the castle, still surrounded by her enemies. Darren would want revenge. Rosalind would want to destroy her. Her father would want to control her. And then there was the king. She had seen the look in his eyes as she had walked away. Not anger, not disappointment, something else, curiosity, interest. The old man was not as frail as he appeared. He was watching the game. And he was waiting to see who would make the next move. She reached her chambers and closed the door behind her, leaning against it and sliding to the floor. The TARs came then, hot and silent. She had been so strong in the hall, so brave, but now alone. The weight of what she had done crashed down on her. She had thrown away a crown. She had risked everything. She had made enemies of the most powerful people in the kingdom, and yet beneath the pyre, there was a fierce, burning joy. She was free. She was no longer bound to Rian. She was no longer a pawn in her father's game. She was her own woman, and for the first time in her life, she was in control. A soft knock on the door made her stir. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her eyes. "It is, Anya, my lady. I have brought you tea and there is someone else here, a visitor. He says he has a message for you." Elara's here lurched. A visitor. Who would send a message to her now? When the entire court was buzzing with the scandal of her broken engagement, she smoothed her gown, composed her face, and opened the door. Anya stood in the hallway, her face pale with worry. Behind her was a man. He was tall and lean, dressed in simple black leather. His face was sharp angular, his eyes dark as coal. He was not a noble, he was a servant. But there was something about him that suggested he was far more than that. "Lady Elara," he said, bowing low, "I am sent by my master. He asks that you accept this token of his esteem." He held out a small velvet pouch. Elara took it, her fingers trembling. She opened the pouch and tipped the contents into her palm. It was a brooch, a small, exquisite piece of silver, shaped like a raven in flight. Its eyes were tiny chips of onyx, and they gleamed in the candlelight. "Who is your master?" she asked, her voice really a whisper. The man smiled, a thin knowing smile. "He said you would know. He said to tell you that the shadows are always watching, and that you are not alone." He bowed again and read down the corridor before Elara could ask another question. She read after him, her mind racing. The raven. It was the sigil of the Blackwood, the symbol of Lord Kalan, the king's best son. The man who had watched her from the shadows in the great hall. The man who had tried to devoured her in her first life. He had sent her a message, a cryptic, mysterious message, but it was a message nonetheless. He was offering her his protection, or his alliance, she did not know which, but she knew that she could not afford to refuse. She clutched the brooch in her hand, the silver seal against her skin. She would wear it openly, as a sign that she was not alone. It would send a message to Ryan and Rosalind and her father. It would tell them that she had allies, that she was not to be trifled with. The next few days passed in a blur of whispered rumors and sidelong glances. The court was alive with speculation. What had happened in the great hall? Was the prince really unfaithful? Was Lady Elara, or was she telling the truth? The scandal was delicious, and no one wanted to let it go. Elara kept to her chambers, avoiding the stieres and the whispers. She spent her days reading, planning, and waiting. She knew Rian would not let her insult go unanswered. He was too proud, too ambitious. He would find a way to retaliate. She just did not know when or how. The answer came sooner than she expected. It was late in the evening, 3 days after the wedding, when a servant arrived at her door with a summons. The king wanted to see her, alone. Elara's blood turned to ice. The king, the old frail, seemingly airless king, he had watched her humiliate his son. He had not intervened, he had simply observed, and now he wanted to see her. She dressed serifully, choosing a gown of deep blue that brought out the flecks of gold in her eyes. She pinned the raven brooch to her bodice, a silent declaration of her allegiance. And then she walked to the king's private chambers, her heart pounding with fear and anticipation. The chambers were smaller than she expected, intimate. The walls were lined with books, and a fire crackled in the hearth. The king sat in a large arm chair, a blanket draped over his knees. He looked old, frail, but his eyes were sharp as a hawk's, and they missed nothing. "Lady Elara," gesturing for her to sit, "thank you for coming. I know you must be wondering why I asked you here." "Your Majesty," she said, curtsying low, "I confess I am curious." The king smiled, weary smile. "You have caused quite a stir, my dar. My son has been pacing the halls like a caged beast. The court is in an uproar, and my advisors are all telling me I should have you arrested for treason." Elara's heart stopped. "Your Majesty, treason," he repeated, "insulting the crown, slandering a prince, breaking a sacred betrothal. It is a long list, my day, a very long list." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. "But I am not going to arrest you." Elara's breath came out in a shuddering sigh. "Thank you, Your Majesty. Do not thank me yet," he said, raising a hand. "I am not doing this out of kindness. I am doing this because I am curious. I want to know why you did it. I want to know what my son did to make you so desperate that you would throw away a crown." Elara met his gaze. She could lie. She could spin a tale of madness, of nerves, of a woman too fragile to bear the weight of royal life. But something told her that the king would see through it. He was not a fool. He was a man who had ruled for decades, who had seen every kind of deceit and manipulation. He would not be swayed by a pretty lie. She took a deep breath and told him the truth, not the whole truth. She could not tell him about the fire, about the death, about the second chance, but she told him about Darian's coldness, his cruelty, his affair with Rosalind. She told him about the whispers, the sidelong glance, the way her husband, to be, had made her feel like a possession rather than a person. I could not marry him, Your Majesty, she said, her voice steady. I could not bind myself to a man who would betray me. It would have destroyed me, not my body, but my soul. And I would rather die than let that happen. The king was silent for a long moment, then he laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound, like the rustle of dead leaves. You are a remarkable woman, Elara Ashworth. Do you know that? You have more courage than half the men in my court. My son is a fool for losing you. Elara's eyes widened. Your Majesty, I have watched Darian for years, the king continued. I have watched his ambition, his greed, his cruelty. He thinks I do not see it. He thinks I am old and blind, but I see everything. I know he would be a terrible king. He is too selfish, too arrogant. And his alliance with your father would have made him even more dangerous. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. You have done me a favor, my dar. You have shown the court that my son is not the man they think he is. You have weakened his position, and for that, I am grateful. Elara did not know what to say. She had not expected this. She had expected anger, punishment, exile. She had not expected gratitude. The king said, reaching for a goblet of wine, I have a proposition for you. I am old. I will not live to see the end of this year, and when I die, my son will take the throne, unless I choose another successor. Elara's breath caught in her throat. Another successor, Your Majesty. I have a bastard son, the king said, his eyes glinting. Kaelan. You may have seen him at court. He is a shadow, a weapon, a tool, but he is also my blood, and he is a good man. He is the only one of my children who is fit to rule. Elara's heart was pounding now. Kaelan, the man who had sent her the raven brooch, the man who had watched her from the shadows. The king wanted to make him king. I am not asking you to marry him, the king said, a wry smile on his lips. Not yet. I am asking you to help me. I need allies, people I can trust, people who have no love for Darian and his schemes. You are one of those people. Will you help? Elara looked at the king, at his tired eyes and his wry smile. She looked at the raven brooch on her bodice, the symbol of her new alliance. She thought of Darian's cruelty, Rosalind's betrayal, her father's greed, and she thought of Kaelan, the man who had erased her, the man who had tried to save her, the man who was watching her now, waiting to see if she would accept his help. She knew this was a dangerous game. She was stepping into a web of intrigue and betrayal that could destroy her, but she also knew that this was her chance to get revenge. Her chance to take everything from those who had taken everything from her. Yes, Your Majesty, she said, her voice ringing with conviction. I will help you, the king smiled. A true smile, warm and genuine. Then we have much to discuss. As Elara left the king's chambers, she felt a strange calm settle over her. She was no longer a victim. She was no longer a pawn. She was a player in the Game of Thrones, and she was ready to play. She had the king's favor, she had Kaelan's protection, and she had a burning, unquenchable desire for justice. The first move had been made, the duel had begun, and she was going to win. The morning light crept through the tall windows of Elara's chambers, painting golden stripes across the stone floor. She had not slept. Her mind was a churning sea of plans and possibilities, each wave crashing against the shores of her resolve. The king's words echoed in her head like a sacred vow. I will not live to see the end of this year. The clock was ticking, and she had to move fast. She sat at her vanity, the raven brooch pinned to her dressing gown, and stared at her reflection. The girl in the mirror looked different now. There was a sharpness in her eyes that had not been there before, a sharpness. She was no longer the soft, trusting creature who had walked into Darian's trap. She was a blade, honed and waiting. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Anya entered, carrying a tray of breakfast. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She had been crying, milady, Anya said, setting the tray down with trembling hands. I heard something terrible. I thought you should know. Elara's stomach tightened. What is it? Prince Darian, Anya whispered, her voice shaking. He has been speaking to the lords. He is telling them that you are mad, that you were overcome with hysteria, and that the wedding was called off for your own protection. He says you are not fit to be a wife, let alone a princess. He is spreading rumors that your mother's madness has passed to you. Elara's hands curled into fists beneath the table. It was a cunning move. Ryan could not admit that she had rejected him, that she had exposed his infidelity. He had to spin the narrative, to make himself the victim and her the villain. And the story of her mother's madness was the perfect weapon. Her mother had suffered from melancholia in her final years, a quiet sadness that had slowly consumed her. Ryan was twisting that grief into a weapon, using it to destroy Elara's reputation. Does my father? Her voice dangerously calm. Everyone knows, my lady, Anya said, her voice breaking. The servants are re-talking, the nobles are re-whispering. They are saying you will be sent away, locked in a convent, hidden from the world so you cannot embarrass the family further. Ara rose from her chair, her movements slow and deliberate. She crossed to the window and looked out at the gardens below. The roses were in full bloom, their petals a riot of red and pink. It was a beautiful day. A day for weddings and celebrations, not for guillars and betrayals. But she was at and she had to strike back. She said, turning to face her handmaiden, I need you to do something for me. I need you to spread a rumor of your own. Anya's eyes widened. Rumor, my lady. Ya said, a cold smile spreading across her lips. I need you to tell the servants that I am not mad, that I am heartbroken. That I called off the wedding because I discovered Prince Ryan has been meeting with my sister, Rosalind. That I have proof of their affair. That I am a wounded woman, a betrayed woman, not a mad one. Anya gasped, but my lady, that is the truth, isn't it? I have seen them together in the gardens, in the library. I never said anything because I thought I must be mistaken. But I have seen the way they look at each other. Elara's heart ached for this loyal girl. She had been carrying this secret, this burden, all alone. You were not mistaken, Anya. They have been betraying me for years, and now they are trying to destroy my reputation to cover their own sins. But I will not let them. Anya, her face reddening with resolve, I will tell everyone, my lady. I will make sure they know the truth. The rumor spread like wildfire. By midday, the entire palace was buzzing with it. Prince Ryan and Lady Rosalind, a secret affair, betrayed bride, a broken engagement. It was the scandal of the season, and it was exactly what Elara had wanted. She walked through the palace that afternoon, her head held high, her expression a mask of quiet dignity. She let the whispers wash over her, let the stars cut through her like knives. She was the tragic heroine, the wronged woman, the victim of a cruel betrayal. And the court, fickle and hungry for drama, was eating it up. She found Rosalind in the rose garden, surrounded by a cluster of young ladies. Her sister was pale, her smile brittle. The rumor had reached her, and she was scrambling to contain the damage. Rosalind called out, her voice too bright, how lovely to see you. I was just telling the ladies about your new gown. It is exquisite. You must tell us who made it. Elara stepped into the circle, her smile. I was a gift from my mother, Rosalind. You remember her, do you not? The woman you and Ryan have been whispering about behind closed doors. The garden went silent. The young ladies exchanged nervous glances. Their eyes wide. Rosalind's smile faltered. I do not know what you mean. Do not you ask, her voice soft and sad. I have heard the rumors, sister, about you and the prince. I did not want to believe them. You are my sister, my own blood. But I have seen the letters. I have seen the way you look at him. And I know the truth. She let a single tear roll down her cheek, a glistening tear that caught the sunlight. She had practiced this in the mirror, and it was flawless. I am not angry, she continued, her voice tremble. I am hurt, deeply, profoundly hurt, but I forgive you, Rosalind, because you are my sister and I love you. I only hope you can find it in your heart to forgive yourself. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. She had not accused Rosalind directly. She had not called her a liar or a traitor. She had simply held up a mirror and let the court see the truth reflected in it. Rosalind's face was a mask of controlled fury. She wanted to scream, to deny everything, but she could not. Elara had painted herself as the forgiving victim, and any denial would make Rosalind look guilty and cruel. She was trapped. Sister, Rosalind said through gritted teeth, I do not know what you have heard. But I promise you it is not true. It does not matter, Elara said, reaching out to take Rosalind's hands. What matters is that we are a family, and family forgives. I hope one day you can forgive me for being so blind. For not seeing what was right in front of me. She released her sister's hands and walked away, the eyes of the court on her. She had just struck a blow that Rosalind would not recover from easily. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was already taking root. That evening, Elara received a summons from her father. She had been expecting it. She walked to his study, her heart pounding, but her face calm. The Duke was seated behind his desk, his face a thundercloud. Do you have any idea what you have done? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. You have destroyed your sister's reputation. You have made our family a laughingstock. The prince is furious, the king is silent. And I am left to clean up the mess. Elara stood before him, her hands clasped in front of her. I have done nothing but tell the truth. Father, if the truth destroys our family's reputation, then perhaps our reputation was built on lies. He rose from his chair, his face red with rage. You are a fool. A naive, foolish girl who has no idea how the world works. You think you can defy me. You think you can defy the crown. You are nothing. You are less than nothing. And I will make sure you never forget it. Elara said, her voice steady. The king has offered me his protection. He has asked me to serve him, and I have accepted. If you try to arm me, you will be arming the king's own ally. The duke froze, his eyes widened. He has spoken to you, Elara said. And he has given me his word that I will not be armed. So you see, father, you cannot send me away. You cannot lock me in a convent. You cannot control me. I am no longer your pawn. The duke stayed red at her, his face a mask of shock and fury. He had been outmaneuvered, and he knew it. The king's favor was a shield she could wield against him. And he could not break it without risking his own position. You will regret this, he finally said, his voice a whisper. You will regret defying me? Perhaps, Elara said, turning to leave. But I will regret being your puppet more. She walked out of the study, her heart racing. She had done it. She had faced her father and won. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As she walked back to her chambers, she found Lord Kalen waiting for her in the corridor. He was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, his dark eyes watching her with an unreadable expression. I heard about your little performance in the garden, he said, his voice low. You have a talent for drama? Elara said, a smile playing on her lips. I had a good teacher. His lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. You have made powerful enemies today. Darren will not forget this, neither will your sister, or your father. You have declared war on them all. Elara said. But I have also made powerful allies. She touched the raven brooch at her bodice. Thank you for the gift, it is beautiful. Kalen stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. It is more than a gift, it is a promise. I will protect you, Elara. As long as you we ring that brooch, you are under my protection, no one will touch you. Elara asked, her voice be really a whisper. Why do you see? What do you want from me? Kalen was silent for a long moment, his eyes searched her face, and she saw something flicker in their depths, something raw and vulnerable. I want to see the world you are building, he finally said. I want to see the people who wronged you fall. I want to see you rise. Because I know what it is like to be a pawn. I know what it is like to be discarded. And I know what it is like to burn with the need for justice. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. You are not alone anymore, Elara. You have me and I will never betray you. She looked into his eyes, and she believed him. It was a dangerous thing, trusting anyone. But she had seen the truth in his words, the sincerity in his gaze. He was not Darren, he was not her father. He was something else entirely. Then let us burn them all, she said, her voice fierce. Together. Kalen smiled a true smile. And fierce, together, he echoed. And in that moment, Elara knew that she had found her Pa Rotner, her equal. The Duer was just beginning. But she was no longer fighting alone. She had the king's favor, Kalen's protection, and a fire in her hayrat that would not be extinguished. The pieces were in place, the game was on, and she was ready to win. The great hall of Castle Veritas was a tomb of memories. Elara stood at the threshold, her fingers tracing the cold stone archway, and she felt the ghosts of her past swirling around her like a winter wind. The walls that had once witnessed her wedding now stood silent and empty, stripped of their tapestries, their banners, their life. The fire that had consumed her in another life had never touched these stones in this one. But she could still smell the phantom smoke, still feel the phantom heat on her skin. It was the war she had waged for months had finally reached its conclusion, and she had won. She walked into the hall, her footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The raven brooch was pinned to her bodice, a constant reminder of the ally who had stood by her through every battle. Kalen was at her side, his hand resting on the small of her back, a silent anchor in the storm. The king's decree will be read in an hour, he said, his voice low and steady. Are you ready? Elara nodded, her gaze fixed on the days at the far end of the hall. The throne sat waiting for its new occupant. I have been ready for a lifetime, she said. Or two. Kaelin's jaw tightened. He knew about her secret now. She had told him everything. In the dark of the night, when the weight of her past had become too heavy to bear alone, she had told him about the fire, the chains, the agony of dying alone and betrayed. He had listened without judgment, his eyes dark with a grief that mirrored her own. I should have been there, he had said, his voice thick with regret. I should have saved you. You did, she had replied, her hand on his cheek. You saved me in this life. That is all that matters. The doors to the great hall swung open, and the court began to file in, nobles in their finest silks, their faces a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. They had heard the rumors, they had watched the duel unfold, and now they were here to witness the final act. Darian was among them. He walked with his head held high, his face a mask of cold arrogance, but Elara could see the cracks in his composure, the tightness around his eyes, the way his hands clenched at his sides. He was a man who had lost everything, and he knew it. Rosalind followed close behind, her copper hair tamed into an elaborate coiffure, her gown a riot of crimson silk. She had tried to stage a comeback, spreading her own rumors, whispering her own lies, but Elara had been faster, more ruthless, and the truth had eventually surfaced. The letters Elara had forged, the whispers she had planted, the subtle manipulation of the court's gossip. It had all worked. Rosalind's reputation was in tatters, and she was now a desperate, cornered animal, lashing out at anyone who came near. Her father brought up the rear, his face a thundercloud. The Duke of Ashworth had been humiliated, his plans dismantled, his power diminished. He had tried to fight back, to reclaim his influence, but the king's favor had been a shield Elara had wielded with devastating precision. He was a broken man, clinging to the remnants of his pride. The king was ridden on a litter, his frail body wrapped in furs. He was dying, his skin as pale as parchment, his breath a labored rasp, but his eyes were sharp clear. And they found Elara the moment he entered the hall. He smiled a thin knowing smile, and she returned it. The court assembled, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. The king's chancellor stepped forward, unrolling a scroll with trembling hands. By decree of his majesty, King Aldrich of Valdoria, the chancellor began, his voice ringing through the hall. The succession of the throne is hereby amended. Prince Darian, firstborn son of the king, is hereby stripped of his title and his claim to the crown, for crimes of treason and conspiracy against the crown. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Darian's face went white, then red. This is absurd, he shouted, stepping forward. I have committed no treason. This is a lie, a fabrication by my enemies. The king raised a frail hand, and the hall fell silent. You conspired to murder your betrothed, he said, his voice weak but clear. You plotted with Lady Rosalind Ashworth to poison Lady Elara and seize her inheritance. You planned to burn her alive and make it look like an accident. Did you think I would not find out? Darian's face drained of color. That is a lie. I never. Silence, the king commanded, his voice cracking like a whip. I have the letters, I have the witnesses. Your treachery is known to me, and you will pay for it. The chancellor continued reading. Prince Darian is hereby exiled from the kingdom, stripped of his lands and titles, and forbidden from ever returning. His co-conspirator Lady Rosalind Ashworth is likewise stripped of her titles and banished to a convent for the remainder of her days. Rosalind let out a sharp cry, her hands flying to her mouth. No. You am innocent. Elara. Tell them I am innocent. Elara stepped forward, her expression calm and unreadable. You are not innocent, Rosalind, she said, her voice soft but searing through the hall. You poisoned me, you killed my child, you conspired with Darian to destroy me. You have been unmasked. Rosalind collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Please, Elara, I am your sister. Have mercy. Elara looked down at her, and she felt a flicker of something she had not expected. Rosalind was pathetic, a creature driven by greed and ambition, and she had destroyed herself with her own devices. Elara had not needed to lift a finger to finish her. She had simply given her the rope, and Rosalind had hanged herself with it. Mercy is not for those who show none, Elara said. But I will grant you this one kindness. I will not gloat, I will not dance on your grave, I will simply walk away and forget you existed. She turned back to the chancellor, who was continuing the decree, and finally, the chancellor said, his voice rising, the succession of the crown is hereby allotted to Lord Kaelin of the Blackwood, legitimized son of his majesty, to be crowned king of Valdoria upon the death of his father. The hall erupted, gasps, whispers, shouts of outrage and applause. It was a shocking announcement. A complete upheaval of the established order. Kaelin the bastard, the shadow, the forgotten son was to be king. Kaelin stepped forward, his face impassive. He had known this was coming. but the weight of it seemed to settle on his shoulders, like a physical burden. He turned to Elara, his eyes meeting hers, and she saw the question in them, the uncertainty, the fear. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. You will be a great king, she whispered. I have no doubt. And you, he asked, his voice low. Will you stand by me? She smiled, a true smile, warm and bright. I will stand by you always. The king gestured for Elara to approach. She walked to his litter, her heart pounding, and knelt beside him. His eyes were dimming, the light fading from them, but his voice was still strong. You have done well, Ara, he said. You have avenged yourself and your mother. You have brought justice to those who wronged you. And you have given my kingdom a future it did not deserve. I only did what was right. Your Majesty, she said. No, he said, shaking his head, you did what was necessary. That is far more difficult, and far more airy. He reached into his robes and pulled out a small velvet box. This is for you. A gift from a dying king to the woman who will be his queen. Elara opened the box. Inside lay a ring, a simple band of silver set with a single black pyre. It was beautiful, understated, and utterly perfect. We are it, the king said. And remember that you are the queen of your own destiny. No one can take that from you. Not ever again. Elara slipped the ring onto her finger, and she felt a dewy earth spread through her chest. It was a promise, a vow. A reminder that she had triumphed over the darkness that had once consumed her. The king closed his eyes, and his breathing slowed. Now, go, he whispered. Go and build your kingdom. I will rest now. She rose, her hand still in Kalen's, and they walked away from the dying king. The court pirated before them, their eyes wide, their whispers hushed. She had been the victim, the pawn, the forgotten wife. Now she was the victor, the queen in waiting. The woman who had burned her enemies without ever striking a match. She paused at the threshold of the great hall, looking back one last time, the empty throne, the crumbling pillars, the ghosts of her past. And she thought of the woman she had been, the naive girl who had walked into this hall with a heart full of love and a head full of dreams. That girl was gone. She had died in the flames of another life. But she had risen stronger, fiercer, unbreakable. Kalen squeezed her hand. What are you thinking? He asked. She turned to him, a smile playing on her lips. I am thinking that the fire that was meant to destroy me only made me stronger, and that the ashes of my past are the foundation of my future. He leaned in, his forehead touching hers. You are remarkable. You have always been remarkable. It just took the rest of the world a little longer to see it. She laughed, a soft, joyful sound. Better late than never. They walked out of the great hall together, into the golden light of the setting sun. The raven brooch gleamed on her bodice, a symbol of the ally who had stood by her. The black pyre ring glinted on her finger, a promise of the future that awaited her. And in the distance, the bells of the cathedral began to ring, a joyful peal that echoed across the kingdom. The old king was dead. Long live the new king. And long live the queen who had risen from the ashes to claim her crown. Elara looked up at the sky, her heart full, her spirit unbroken. She had been betrayed, broken, burned, but she had survived. She had fought, she had won, and she would never be forgotten.